Speaker today. Rick Lochner is going to talk to us about leadership at the speed of business. And thank you, Rick. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. I presume everybody can hear me all right. Kevin, just kind of give me a high sign that you can hear me fine.
Yep, all good. Thank you.
Awesome. So today it's really around leadership at the speed of business. And, you know, when we look at the kind of take a broader view of what's going on in the realm of business in general. And I know most of the folks on the call today are from associations, you know, like any nonprofit, for-profit, you know, there's still basics of business, and, you know, the market really doesn't care as far as, you know, what goes on in, you know, outside the castle gates, as I like to characterize it. It's all going to have an impact on how we lead our businesses and lead ourselves and lead our teams. So the theme here is really around the speed of business. And it's, you know, one of the truisms of business, regardless of what line of work we're in, for-profit, small business, corporate, Fortune 100, make a difference. The speed of business, the rate of change is going to impact us all. So today we want to talk about, you know, the theme is really adaptability and how we adapt to those changing times, and what are some of the key elements that we need to embrace as leaders of these organizations so that we can lead in these uncertain times. And as I do for any presentation that I give, you know, we have to talk about a call to action. Without a call to action, then, you know, this will be a great 30-minute conversation, but if there's no action, then there's no change, and obviously that's what we're looking for. Adaptability doesn't happen without change. So how do we go about that? So let's start with why we need to adapt. Now, a lot of these numbers and statistics come from a video that I show, you know, among the many clients that I work with, whether they be nonprofits, small businesses, corporate teams. I also do a leadership institute for high school kids every year for our local high school school district. And I show them at the very beginning, I show them a video of it's called Did You Know? It's referenced there at the bottom of the slide. The most recent one is Did You Know 2017, and because it's updated every year. And the whole idea here is to really kind of try to put our mind around why we have to have this conversation around adaptability. So when you think about almost 21 billion devices connected to the internet in 2 short years, 21 billion is a pretty staggering number. And the acronyms there refers to, it's going to be more machine to machine than person to person. So, you know, when you think about machines are talking to each other, not in the verbal sense as people do, but still communicating with each other, and the intelligence that's built into technology, that's a lot of connections, creating a lot of information, and that will somehow, some way have to be processed at some point in time by human beings. We also look at the fact that we're no longer a text-based society. So again, by 2020, video representing 80% of all internet traffic. So there's a reason why YouTube is the #2 search engine in the world. We no longer want to read, we want to watch. And I think that's, you know, if we haven't all figured that out by now, that's maybe we didn't know that it would be 80%, but certainly as you look on social media, you're seeing more and more video-based content. And then you look at the impact that Twitter has had on our world, literally 500 million tweets sent every day. And when you think about the impact that Twitter has had on world events, not just local events, you kind of get a sense that, hey, this is part of the dynamic that is making the world smaller. Continuing on, robots. You know, we've all heard about augmented reality. We've all heard about artificial intelligence, and certainly robots have evolved, not quite to the Skynet level or the Terminator level or, you know, whatever movie metaphor you choose to use. But when you think about the fact that it's going to replace 5 million workers, you have to ask the question, how many of those workers work for you? How many of those workers that will ultimately be replaced by robots who can either do it cheaper, better, or both? Then we have the self-driving cars and trucks. Picture of one there on the slide. 10 million of them. And so when you think about the theme that all this represents, this idea that technical information doubles every 2 years is pretty incredible, because it actually drives a dynamic that is reflected here. So when you look at the jobs that, you know, some of these in-demand jobs, they didn't exist 10 years ago, which means we're training students. And of course, the audience that I show the video, they are students, but these students are going to be your workforce in short order. So it matters greatly. We are preparing students for jobs that don't exist using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems that we don't know are problems yet. And this is not even new. I mean, when you think about 10, 12, 15 years ago, if you can put yourself back in time, let's say 15 years ago, just for grins, how many of us were talking about drone pilots? How many of us were talking about social media managers as a full-time job? And how many of us were talking about, you know, the skill set needed to service self-driving vehicles? So this is not new. What's new is the fact that it's happening at a greater pace. And that's really what we need to embrace. So the question becomes, what are the business leadership implications of being an adaptable business, of keeping up with this so that we're not always on the react side of the equation, that we're actually on the proactive side of change. Because as I like to say, there's really only two positions you can be in change. You can either drive change or you're a victim of change. There's really no in between there. So most people I know, most leaders I know in business prefer not to be a victim. But the question then remains, how do we become proactive in this fast-moving business that we're in? So how much of your business is run the same way it was 5 years ago? Most people, or 2 years ago, most people would say no, but yet are you still leading it the same way? So intellectually, we may be embracing the idea that, yeah, things have changed, but have we changed the way we're leading the business? Okay, so sorry, I got a little, seems to have locked up a little bit here.
Need to move to the next slide, Rick.
Let me just ignore this. Can you, no, you can't advance it. Okay. All right. So I'll give everybody a chance to take out a piece of paper and I'm going to have to restart this as we go. Okay. And we're back. All right, so leadership is about, we talk about leadership in this fast-paced environment we work in, but I think it's also helpful that we have to define what leadership is. And what I've listed here is leadership is, in my definition as a leadership coach, setting goals and achieving desired results over and over again. Sustainable success is really the theme of the Missing Piece series of books that I've written over the last 3 or 4 years, because anybody can be successful once, anybody can achieve desired results once, but the true leadership is about setting those goals and achieving it over and over again. And of course, part and parcel to that is the idea that the behavior, what we do is a function of what we think, and what we think is a function of our value set. So if we want different results, it stands to reason that we have to do different to get different, which is what change and adaptability really is. But the core of it all is really, are we thinking different? So these are the 5 keys to success that to lead in a constantly changing environment, uncertain environment. And I'll go through each of these individually. But as you can see, this idea of speed, this idea of service, this idea of thinking differently, this idea of context over, or what I call knowledge over information. And then of course, if this idea of adaptability isn't part of the culture, then it's really not going to work the way we think it's going to. So let's break them down one at a time. The first one is getting ready to war. For Star Wars fans, you can recognize that as the Millennium Falcon. And I remember back in 1977 when the first Star Wars movie came out, and that scene where they go to warp speed. It's that's symbolic as far as I'm concerned. It's symbolic of, it's not the ability to adapt, it's the ability to adapt at the speed at which you need to stay relevant. And associations are clearly in those crosshairs. Associations are always looking at ways to stay relevant. So how do they do that at the speed of the market? Because I've always thought that, in order to stay relevant, do you really understand? One of the questions I always ask is, do you really know what industry you're in? Do you really understand in the sense of, do you know the trends that are impacting your business? And here's where, in my mind, and I say this as every time I get the opportunity, if your association is not providing you some of that to support, the trends in the industry, then you might think about the value that you're really getting from that association membership. So I think associations truly have that ability, not just on technical skills, but in business and industry skills. It's also the idea that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect to be excellent in what you do. Excellence is the ability to be the best at what you do. And in today's speed-enhanced, technology-enhanced world, that doesn't necessarily mean perfection. And I say that because I run into a lot of perfectionists, and their struggle is not that the fact that they're perfect or trying to be perfect, it's the fact that their need for perfection is always got them behind the power curve. So it's, how are we looking at this proactively? How are we looking at this in the ability to be excellent without being perfect, and truly understanding what's going on in our industry in order to keep up? The second key to success is around servant leadership, because let's face it, we can't do it by ourselves. No leader can. No leader can be more successful than the team that they lead. As you can see here, nothing more, nothing less. So some of the key challenges are, how are you hiring for attitude? How are you hiring for the people that will truly be fit as part of the kind of team that you're looking for? And how are we leading with, in order to get the team to embrace the vision and mission and the constant changes that are going on, how are they emotionally tied to your business? It's not just that they're doing it because it's a job and going through the mechanics of doing their job, but are they following with head, heart, and soul? And more importantly, are you leading with head, heart, and soul? So Servant leadership is the second key to success, which leads us to the third key to success is cognitive diversity. Now, there's a lot of conversation in the business world of inclusion and diversity. And as far as I'm concerned, all of that is good. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to the power of cognitive diversity. So success is in diverse thinking, not necessarily diverse demographics. So even though an organization may look diverse, if the thinking is not diverse, then you're really not going to get what you're looking for. So people who think differently ultimately do differently, which means are you looking at the psychographics of your organization? In other words, are you looking at the diversity of attitude, not just the diversity of gender or race or religion or any of the other demographic data that we tend to look at? It also begs the question of how open to curiosity are you? We hear ad nauseum this idea of innovation, but unfortunately, innovation doesn't come without curiosity and creativity. The innovation is doing different, creativity is thinking differently. So you have to, going back to the previous thought, you have to think differently in order to do differently. Part of being able to think differently and look at the world a little bit different is this idea context over content. We live in an information-rich, knowledge-poor world. In other words, when you look at, there's a concept called the DIKW cycle: data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. When you look at information is really organized data. We put it into spreadsheets, we put it into databases, reports, and that's where, unfortunately, a lot of leaders make their decisions. But we need to put that information into some sort of context, give a meaning to it, and that's what creates knowledge. Easy way to understand it: everybody knows tomato is a fruit. That's information. Knowledge is knowing that you don't put a tomato in a fruit salad. So it's one thing to know what you're doing, it's another thing to know when and where you need to do what you do. So what leaders do with their information is more important than the information they've accumulated itself. Brings us to the last key to success, and that is the fact that it's this idea of adaptability has to be institutional, has to be cultural, because again, no one person can do it by themselves. Sustainable success, this idea that adaptability becomes a lifelong exercise. We've heard the term lifelong learning. Learn to continuously learn. Alvin Toffler has a quote that I use often relative to this slide, and he says, the illiterate of the 21st century is not the one that can't read or write. The illiterate of the 21st century is the one that can't unlearn, relearn, and learn. So when we think of this idea of adaptability, it's how are we embracing adaptability within our cultures? How are we letting ideas bubble up from the ground up? How are we letting this creativity I spoke of just a couple of slides ago bubble up from the ground up? How are we enforcing that from the top down? And so it has to be culture. Culture exists in every organization, whether we realize it or not. The question is not whether culture exists. The question is whether the culture is the right one for where we want to take the organization. So those are the 5 keys to success: speed, team first, think different, communicate meaning, and make it part of the culture. So what do we do with this? What do you take away from this quick 30-minute presentation that will help you effectively adapt and lead at the speed of business in your organization? And I would challenge you right now, just pull out a piece of paper and write down one thought or idea, and then give yourself a 30-day goal. What will you do in the next 30 days based on these 5 keys to essentially affect change, because as we just said, no new action, no new result. So Kevin, maybe we can open it up to questions, or and see if that's generated any thoughts and ideas from the audience.
Yes, thank you very much, Rick. Folks, if you want to use the chat button on the bottom of your Zoom panel to submit a question, that'd be great. And as you're thinking about that, or even writing down your call to action, I just want to review some logistics. So everyone will get a copy of this presentation, as well as a CAE certificate for those who are tracking that. And also, we'll send out a link to this recording. So you have this information, both hard copy as well as a link to the .org Community TV. We will be posting this. So a question that's coming in here, Rick, is what are some of the skills needed for being adaptable?
So great question. When you think about what do I need to know how to do? And it's one of the skills is, specifically the skills, is being able to carve out the time to understand what are some of the trends in your industry. If you're too in the weeds and you don't understand the balance between what you're doing tactically and what you're doing strategically, and now I'm addressing leadership here. If you don't make the time to sit and read and understand the impact of what's going on, you have to carve that time out. I have been accused throughout my corporate career, accused in a positive way, of having a crystal ball. I've literally had clients say, well, what's next in your crystal ball? And naturally, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't read the future any more than the next person. But what I do, one of the skills that has helped me succeed over the years as a corporate leader was always the ability I always made time to understand what was going on, which way the winds were blowing in my industry, whether it be telecom or healthcare or nonprofits or now coaching and leadership. I'm always reading, and I'm always processing it as I always land on, how does this impact what I'm doing today? And so that's an invaluable skill set that every leader has to have to be able to look at and interpret what's going on. Because, and part of the ability to do that is trusting your team, that the team is doing what needs to be done today, so that you can look at what needs to be, what direction are you going to have to give them for tomorrow? I remember at Sprint, for instance, having a meeting with all of the engineers that reported to me, and this was in the late 90s. And I said, if you can't work with wireless and the internet, you will be irrelevant. And this was well before wireless became the standard bearer for telecommunications. But it just occurred to me that really was going to be the future well before it was, because I took the time to read and understand and to process so that I could share that with my team and essentially help them stay relevant, whether it be through training or just looking at experimentation, that sort of thing, to be able to keep up. And now it almost becomes second nature. Part of that is a personal skill set that I adopted about 20 years ago. I personally changed something about my routine every 6 months. I learned how to write left-handed 6 years ago, just because it constantly keeps me in a mode of change, and keeps me in a mode of change is normal and change is comfortable. So it has helped me over the years embrace a concept that I am very comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Great. So another question coming is how do we convert those, who dig in their heels and oppose new and different approaches, the naysayers?
Well, another great question. It really is around how effectively you're communicating the why of change. I remember as a professor, one of my graduate students came to me and she was in pharmaceutical sales, and she was explaining, her dilemma was they were having a great year, but their sales executive was already talking about how things were going to have to change next year. And it was very difficult for her to see, well, wait a minute, we're killing it. Why do we have to change? And the challenge that her executive had was explaining that, yes, we're doing well now, but here kind of goes back to the answer of the last question. But here's what it's going to look like next year if we don't evolve, if we don't adapt to a new way of doing business. And so it's the naysayers. The naysayers are going to push back. It's almost a human reaction, normal human reaction to resist change, because it puts us into a discomfort zone. So it really boils down to how effectively are the leaders explaining the why. And I've always embraced it as, look, here's the why, here's what we need to do. And it really is about the health of the organization, not necessarily about the health of the individual. Although we need that some net of individuals to make this happen, but maybe that person, that naysayer at that point in time, is not the right person to take the organization to the next level. And I've always left it up to, if I feel that I did a good job of explaining why and embracing the questions and embracing the emotions that come with change, ultimately it boils down to that person making a decision of, is this what they want to do? And if not, fine. If so, here's how we proceed. As individuals, we go through the resistance to change process, much like we go through the grieving process. If you're familiar with the 5 stages of grief, we're in denial, then we resist. And then at some point we either step out or we step in and say, okay, I'm on board.
Great. So, one of the things that I was noticing that everything's happening so fast, and that's, something that Sherry and I are doing when we speak and, part of our book. So what's your take on how do you pick a strategy when things are coming at you so fast and change fast?
Well, it's the, I guess I've always relied heavily on a piece of advice I got from a mentor many years ago. He said, get comfortable making good B+ decisions. And what he meant by that was, when you're at 80% surety, 80, 82, whatever, when you're 80% sure, make the decision. Because the other 20% is going to be a constant on the fly, make those changes. So staying ahead of it is, I've grown very comfortable making good 80% decisions, or when I have 80% of the information I needed that I was fairly certain that I was directionally correct, then we went with it. And sometimes every time we had that other 20% went nothing like we originally thought it might, but that's okay. We were still directionally correct. And I can assure you, when you embrace that philosophy, you're still way ahead of your competition, who I am certain are not thinking that way, because they're just trying to be comfortable and play. It's again, going back to an attitudinal, are you playing not to lose, or are you playing to win? People who play to win are pushing forward. They're proactive. They're not afraid to make corrections on the fly. People who are playing not to lose are risk averse and are going to stay, well, yeah, but it's working. Why break it? Well, in today's world, if it ain't broken, you need to break it and make it better. That's because eventually it'll be broken out of because of irrelevance. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. And thank you, Rick.